third year. I don't know about that. One of the hockey guys.
This is your last year.
But it was a theory.
I literally tried to run my mustache and beard for 6 months, and all it looked like was.
Isn't it?
Let's
Call it to order, right? And then we do the pledge of allegiance, then we do roll call.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wing it. Hey, Sean, are you ready?
All right, change it all up this morning, doesn't look like it.
Oh, you should have left it so we'd have something to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, with a quorum of the board present, I'll call the meeting to order. With that, we'll do a roll call. Commissioner Timbo. Here. Commissioner Arntz. Here. Commissioner Smith. Here. Commissioner Baki. Here. Commissioner Evans.
Here.
Commissioner Hovind.
Yes, sir.
And Commissioner Rooney is here. With that, we'll say the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first agenda item is the consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action, but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. Are there any items that a board member would like to have pulled from the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda is the approval of the board meeting minutes from June 2018. Payroll checks totaling for June $133,839.60, and for July $91,073.28. Maintenance and operation checks for June of the sequence number 23,992 to 24,067. For July, 24,067 to 24,128, totaling for June, $322,954.97, and July totaling $800,504.35. Approval of the passenger facility charge totaling for June $50,000 and for July $90,000, and the financial reports for June and July 2018.
This is just being critical, but did we have 24,067 checks written, one in June and one in July? Or did we have one written at midnight?
Oh, Jesus. Or should July be 24,068?
68.
Where is the other one?
It ends in the 67 and the other one starts at the 67 too.
Well, it must start at
The other one
68.
starts at 68. It's a typo.
It was a clerical typo.
Thank you.
It's actually a very good catch, Sean, because our auditors will catch that and we'll have to change it anyhow, so. Thank
Well
you.
done.
Thank you.
Having made that minor administrative or clerical change, is there a motion?
I have a
Go ahead.
question. I can't recall where I was looking exactly, but was there, it seemed like there was quite a variance in payroll between July, or June and July. Was there an extra payroll?
There's a
in June?
3-day period in
Okay,
June.
thanks. I don't remember where I saw it,
It is here, 133,000 versus 91,000.
but, okay, thank you.
Sure. Is there a motion for consent?
I move that we accept the consent agenda as stated with the minor correction.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
The consent agenda has been moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion regarding the consent agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of accepting the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Consent agenda is passed. John, it's on to you for the director's report.
Yes, welcome back, everyone. Exciting new fiscal year ahead of us. Just some things to report. United wrapped up their service to Chicago last week. We've seen July numbers. We have not yet seen August numbers, but July averaged for the month 92% loads on a daily flight to Chicago, and I think that's just stellar. So You really can't ask for much more than that when you get done with connecting flights that get missed because of the rain showers back east, or people that change their mind and don't go on the trip or change their plans. 92% is a very good load, and so we're very excited with how that route performed. Fares were a little suppressed this summer. United did tell us that the fares weren't as high as they'd hoped. I don't think that's anything to worry about. I think with adding the amount of capacity we added to Chicago this summer, and given that Delta was up against that with Minneapolis with 737, we had a tremendous amount of capacity eastbound, and so a little bit of reduction in the fares is probably expected, given we had 4,000 additional outbound seats this summer eastbound, and so that's a huge slug of traffic for us. They're already talking about next year. We've exchanged some emails on times of day changes. They're hoping to incorporate more connections to the East Coast. So possibly instead of leaving Chicago at 9:30, they might back that up an hour or 2 hours to allow more markets to flow into Chicago on the morning hub run in order to get that plane a little fuller. Because as you know, we've been talking about it for some time now, this route is lighting up some non-traditional tourism markets for us down the East Coast. In the Carolinas, Philadelphia is very strong on this flight. All of the Ohio cities, the major cities in Ohio, show up in the top 25 of this route. So I think it creates some unique opportunities for us to have more connecting traffic into some of those major markets back east that we don't normally think of as feeder markets for Great Falls. So the good news is that we are discussing it for next year already, and I think that's a very positive sign, given the route just now ended. So,
Can I ask a question? The local fares were suppressed, or
the
across
overall
the
average
nation?
fare. No, they said we are suppressed more so than other routes. So yeah, it was definitely in our market, the fares were down a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't they set the fare?
They do, but it's it's demand driven. And so what they'll do is they might hold a fare longer, so they get the advanced bookings maybe, a couple of 6 months out even. And if that route really hasn't hit a certain benchmark, they might hold lower fares longer. And that just translates all the way up until flight time. If they haven't gotten the load factor they're looking for, then they'll leave the fares lower. But they did get it to 92%, so that tells you that they were actively selling the route, even if it was a little lower than what we hoped. So there is some culpability there too, that they have, maybe you should have had the fare slightly higher and had an 85% load. I mean, how do you find that sweet spot between load and fare? But yeah, overall, I think we've got to be very pleased with it. July was our second busiest month ever. We were behind July of 14 when we had both LA and Frontier in the market. And so other than that, it was our second busiest month ever. Parking revenues were up 11% in July, probably the best increase we've had in multiple years. So I'm really encouraged with the strength the market showed in that summer traffic time frame. If you've been reading the weekly reports, you know that we've had some issues with the localizer here recently. The localizer is a series of little poles down at the runway end that shoots a signal down the runway and gives the airplanes the center line of the runway. And so as you're coming to fly in, there's a glide slope that goes up into the air and gives you a path into the airport, so it'll guide your plane down. And then there's a localizer that will put you on the center line. Especially if you're flying with a GPS or something like that, those signals are really important. So the localizer signal, as it shoots down the runway, is apparently picking up some interference down our flight line. There's not been much built along our flight line in, really even 15 years. So it's curious to us what that localizer signal might be getting interfered by. The most likely target, I think, in my mind, is the new B4A4 that we build across the runway. It kind of comes in right at the center point, right down in here. The runway gets highest right in this area here, and we have A4, B4 kind of down in this area here. And so we're kind of at a high point in the runway, and that A4, B4 crosses over to the new taxiway C. So we've created somewhat of an earthen dam right there in that center point of the runway at a high elevation. These instruments are shooting down there and trying to get to this runway end where there's a receiver that's telling them what the signal strength is. And so it's possible that we're pushing a lot of that signal in different directions as it hits that earthen dam and even the asphalt that's there, and maybe even the heat signature of that asphalt being there. So you know, the FAA seems to think that a lot of it's bouncing off these buildings, but there isn't much new built down here. And so we received the comments back on the new Eagle Jet hangar that they're seeing some interference down there, and they want to find a way to solve it. And so we met with the FAA last week. The region came up, and we had a good meeting. We believe, I think, in fact, I even had a good message. Didn't say exactly what was on his mind, but I did hear from him this afternoon that they have some ideas. And so I think they're going to approve the big hangar. We've had 2 prior airspace approvals on it, and it moved away from the airfield, which should have helped a little bit. And this time we got a comment back that it might impact the localizer signal. But in talking to the FAA, we feel pretty confident that the hangar will be able to go. But any future development down there, including the other hangar pads that we have planned down there, we may need to upgrade the localizer. We've been doing some work on that in the last 2 weeks to figure out what that would cost. We think it's somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000 to upgrade the localizer to add more arrays, basically, or more things to shoot signal down there to make the signal stronger. And so the FAA would normally tell us that's our cost to absorb. But because we had a federally funded project that may be impacting the localizer, there's an opportunity that we might get some funding for that. And so even this year, we have about, what do we have left in that one grant, guys? About $230,000. The discretionary grant we received for the A4, that's taxiway C A4B4 complex, we underran it by about $230,000. And so our hope might be that the FAA would consider using that underrun on the project that caused the interference to fund some upgrades to the array. And so that was kind of our ask last week, and hopefully we'll be able to make some headway on that. That decision would need to be made quickly because the accounting books for the FAA will be closing in the next 3 weeks for the federal fiscal year end. So that actually might work to help us because that money is kind of stranded as it is in that grant. So we're very hopeful that we can get some headway made on that localizer. The great thing about getting upgraded to a 20 would be that we would have a lot of capacity in that localizer signal for future development on the airfield. So I think this issue would be put to rest for a long time. We'd be able to develop all of our master planned facilities down that flight line without being concerned about the signal.
How difficult is it to make it the case that that's causing the interference?
It's all based on modeling, and so it's very difficult to determine if there is even a problem. And so one approach that we could pursue is there's a consultant that can model the airfield precisely. Kind of what they've described to us is they draw a big box around like the Air Force Base, the Manning Base, and say that's all a signal blocking line. And so one thing we can do is hire a consultant that would go in and say, no, it's made up of 5 buildings that are this big, and so the signal degradation would be this. And so it's all theoretical. It's a science-based approach to determining it. And that's one of the reasons we feel confident the FAA is going to allow us to build that bigger hangar. And if there is interference at that point, then we would have to upgrade the array for certain. So yeah, there is, it's hard to say what's causing the interference. The last flight check, though, supposedly did identify some interference. They think something was going on. They went out and recalibrated the instruments, and that seemed to help because the wind will blow them out of alignment, so they're not shooting straight. So they did go out and realign everything after the last flight check.
Who aligned it?
The FAA tech ops that's here on the field.
It's FAA equipment.
It is all FAA equipment, yeah.
So this is just like giant set of lights in your garage door opener, right? So boom, boom. I mean, there's gotta be a meter, right?
Except they go out to 22 miles.
Yeah, but, I mean, there's gotta be a meter that you can walk around and get signal strength. There's gotta be.
Yeah.
Well, somehow they identified the interference.
Yeah, they identified it with a flight check. So FAA tours around the country and flies approaches, and when they flew ours, they said localizer signal was impaired. So they did go out and adjust it. They have not flown it since, so we don't know for certain what the impact of that adjustment is. But they are sensitive to it. They're worried about the new hangar, and so I'm fairly confident, based on our discussions last week, that the hangar will be approved on the 7460 on the resubmitted 7460. But I think any future development, we will have to make some type of investment in that array.
So John, I'm just trying to follow this. If they decide that it wasn't that project and they say no, find the funds, then what's the plan?
We would have to fund it ourselves.
Ourselves.
Yeah, before any future development. Now, I think I would make another run at trying to get it passenger facility charge funded under the argument that passenger facility charges are there to facilitate aviation development. And we can't develop any private hangars at this point, or frankly, any additional terminal facilities or anything else until we fix this array. So it's in the public's interest to have this array fixed so that we can continue to use the airport as it was designed to be used. And in fact, as our master plan shows, we plan to use it. So I think we can back into some arguments for eligibility. But of course, like anything, the FAA is very cautious because there's 300 other airports like us, that want to use funds for, things like this. And so anytime a new funding source is identified, of course, other airports will copy that. So yeah, I think there's more discussions to be had, but if we can show that it's an airfield improvement that's made this change to our signal strength, then I think it's very likely that we could get these federal dollars.
You're not going to do that in the next 3 weeks, though.
I think we will. Yes. I think we'll get it done in the next 3 weeks.
That'd be awesome.
You gotta get it while the money's hot.
That's right.
What about turning on the runway lights? I mean,
You can't see those for 22 miles in a snowstorm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but you can
Well,
see
it's the level of precision too. When you've got Cat 3 approach and they're coming in, they want to hit center line. They don't want to be off center line by even 50, 60 feet can be disastrous. So that signal brings you right down to the center line.
And the Cat 3 approach, they actually computer, the autopilot
Yeah,
lands the airplane on the runway on that signal. The pilot doesn't, he monitors it, but the autopilot follows the localizer signal all the way to touchdown.
Yeah, and even
So if it's off, you're screwed.
yeah, and even the small planes now.
You're not, you're gonna go around.
Right, yeah. Even the small planes now with the Garmin's, I mean, it's bringing you right down on that signal at the glide slope and at the intersection of glide slope and localizer, it's bringing you right down that point.
And they've ruled out that the side load interference with having 6 C-130s parked on the ramp is not a problem.
That's been discussed and they minimized that. I don't think that can be as easily minimized. I think that's a lot of metal. And so, we did bring that up when they were here that, could it be the C-130s and, they seem to think it would flood around the C-130s, but like a solid wall, would bounce it back into the airfield. Because I guess the way the technical guys explained it to us, what's happening is it's bouncing off of something and then going back into the other localizer signals.
Yeah.
And so it's creating a kind of a ball of signal, that they can't interpret at the other end. So if it passed through, like along the contour of an airplane, then supposedly that wouldn't cause that problem.
But if you had a focused mirror on a small airplane, you could easily do that.
Oh, yeah,
So,
you could, exactly, yeah. So we're working that issue. We think we'll get some resolution prior to the next board meeting, so it's possible we may come to September's board meeting and ask for some dollars to match a federal grant. I don't think we'd probably be ready to come and ask for the whole thing if the FAA comes back and says that we have to fund everything, unless they say we can't move forward with the hangar unless we have a plan. In that case, we might come back and say we're going to need to spend a couple $100,000 to get this fixed. Let's see, construction update. We are finally underway with construction. We've got the pipes, the 16-inch line that's being extended along the frontage road is nearly complete. It's still got to be tested, but the construction line is well down to the end of the line. They've got to install a hydrant and we've got to do some inspection out there, but it's well underway. And the contractor's getting ready to start the line down to the new hangar, which is actually the hangar owner's responsibility, but they are going to turn that 16-inch line and move it down towards the hangar here pretty quick. And then they've started working on our 8-inch line that goes over to the new front range hangar. So that's along the front range road there, and it'll go all the way over to the new front range hangar at the far end of the hangar complex to the north there, to get all those hangars hooked up and provide him his fire flows. So we've got quite a bit of construction for waterline underway out there. We met this morning, we had our construction meeting, and we're still, as you see in the board packet, talking about the SRE building and what changes we want to make to that in order to get the steel ordered. The contractor says today he would really like to get that building underway and try to get as much done as possible yet this building season, because next year's looking very busy for them. So they want to try and get the building started. We just have to figure out precisely how we're going to do that. And so that's later on the board packet there. And then the last thing that'll be built is those sewer lines. We'll go down there and do that at the end of the construction, the last piece built. United's on tap to redo the rental car lot. You're thinking September now, Chris?
September 24th.
24th. They'll start that work. We've gone in and fog sealed the employee lot to prepare for that, and restriped and added some stalls, moved some stalls around so that the rental car project can be done. And that'll be great too. The rental car lots had another huge summer, and so now we'll be getting more capacity for them going forward. So I'm really excited about all that. Street assessments, you probably saw the street assessments are still under discussion. We were contacted last week by the FAA to let us know that the city has been in contact with them with regard to street assessments to find out if what we've been saying all along is the case, that under FAA impact fee rules, we're not supposed to pay it. We had a conference call last week with a number of the airports in the state, and Missoula and Helena have also both informed their cities. Missoula has never paid. Helena had paid at some point, but both of them have also provided backup to their cities that the impact fees are not allowed under FAA rules. And there's some solidarity there. They definitely want to support us and vice versa in that discussion, because none of us want to put at risk the kind of funding that we receive annually from the FAA. $2 to $4 million pretty much guaranteed every year, and then the occasional big $12 million runway overhaul or more. That's way too much money to be messing with over some street assessments. So we all want to make sure we're doing whatever it is the FAA would tell us is correct in dealing with the street assessment. So the city has been in contact with the FAA. The FAA did call to tell us that they received kind of they gave them one opinion. They received a more detailed rebuttal to that opinion. And the FAA, I think, is trying to determine whether or not they'll even respond to that. As you might guess, the FAA is not all that interested in long discussions about, with municipalities about things that don't pertain directly to the FAA. So, yeah.
Is there some ambiguity in the language, or it seems like that should be a pretty clear-cut subject?
Yeah, that was the source of this. That was the discussion with the FAA, with the airports last week, and kind of the FAA too. Is it seems pretty settled to them that there is impact fees or impact fees or impact fees. And many communities have tried them in different capacities and ways, but the answer has always been the same. And we had one shot down in Colorado Springs while I was there over stormwater. It was based on acreage, much just like this is based on acreage. So it's really not very difficult to translate that. It's similar.
We're just a cash cow, so they want the money.
Well, it's
Gonna take the money.
it's consistency. I certainly see that. I mean, they're doing everyone else the same way, and we raise our hand and say we can't do that, and so it's unusual for them. The city, that is, and I get that. I mean, it's not a lot of money, but at the same time, they want to feel as though we're not evading something, and so I think the discussion, some level of discussion between them and the FAA is good. Like I said, at some point, I think the FAA will just simply say that we're not going to respond anymore. Airport, this is your problem. You can't pay it, period, and then we'll be responsible for defending that legally. How that takes place. So, yeah. More fun to come, it sounds like.
How much money is it?
So, since we reduced it, do you know what the last assessment was, Maria?
About less than 6,000 or 5,000 something.
Is that the total, or is that the administrative fee?
That's the administrative fee, but
Yeah.
normally it's about $27,000, 6
Yeah.
months around 27.
Yeah, so historically, all the way back to, as far as I can find records, since the airport has been independent from the authority, which frankly isn't that long, 15 years, we've always paid an administrative fee of 7.5% of our assessment. It seems like that was agreed to early on, recognizing that we have these federal difficulties. And the fact that we maintain our own streets. I mean, that's the other thing that FAA mentioned, and is a problem with what's being proposed, is we actually do our own street maintenance right down to mills and overlays and major reconstructions. And so we're not even benefiting from the funding pool that this is contributing to. We're not served by a single city street, not one. It's interstate directly into the airport roads. And so, I mean, that's another reason FAA isn't very comfortable with this approach. And so if you look back, we've always paid the administrative fee. So we've paid $15,000 to $20,000, depending on how much the city's maintenance budget is, because they take their maintenance budget, they divide it by acres, and then dole the bill out. During the last cycle, when I first got here, of renegotiation of the street assessment agreement, one of the things we did was we consolidated all of our parcels because there's a 200 acre cap. And so we had, I would guess, 2 or 3 dozen parcels around the airport, each of one of them subjected to the 200 acre cap. And so as we did our master plan, we said, this is a good time to consolidate these parcels down into larger parcels. And you can imagine, every time we do a lease, we are running across multiple parcel lines, and the question becomes, do you have to annex those into one parcel? I mean, what do we do to deal with this on the legal surveys? So we consolidate all those parcels, which really limited our exposure down to very few parcels. And so we went from, as she said, 20,000 some years down, now we're at like 6,000. But recognize that's only 7.5% of the total that we could be subjected to.
And the FAA's always been, they've overlooked the 7.5%. That seems to be small.
Exactly. They said that's kind of a reasonable accommodation to avoid a big fight, because they realize that a big fight isn't good for the relationship, and we could potentially lose it, and we're in a real hot spot because the feds are saying you can't pay it, and maybe a local court would be saying you could, and so they've always been accommodating towards that approach. But yeah, now I think because the temperature of this has gone up, I think even that may be problematic. I haven't asked the question yet, but I did warn the city early on, why don't we just renew the agreement and do what's been done for 15, 20 years? Because as we draw attention to this, it becomes hard to even do what we've done. Because we're going to get a yes, no answer, which neither of us may want. So more to come on that too, but I think it's, like I said, I think we are hearing that discussion is happening, and so I think maybe there's something positive that'll come out of that. The Eagle Jet steel has shown up on site, so we expect that hangar to start going vertical probably the next couple of months. So we're pretty excited about that. It's staked out in the field now. If you have time, we can run you out there. There's one really big hangar, and so pretty exciting to see that coming together.
It still needs the final FAA approval.
Yes. So what happens is once you get your surveyed corners, you send that back in for another FAA look. And so when we did that, they flagged it again, even though it's been in a similar location for 2 other 7460s. The tech ops person in Seattle this time did flag it. But even at the Helena ADO, it seems like they're confident we can work that one through. It's just the next round of development that we're definitely going to have to do something about already, it sounds like. So.
To me, it seems really crazy to have steel on the ground without agreement that I can actually build it.
Yeah. Yeah, we received 2 approved 7460s prior to, but if you think of how it works, he had to get a contractor. He hired Mike Tabacco. Mike Tabacco goes out and surveys the corners, stakes it, sends that information to the FAA, and the FAA, comes back and says, even though it's substantially in the same position, it's a problem. So I mean that's most of our projects would be done that way. Even our own SRE building, we won't have staked corners to submit the final 7460 until we actually have a contractor on the ground. And he may, in our case, probably they haven't bought the steel yet, but in his case, the contractor did order the steel. We pointed that out to FAA that, this is a major problem now. I mean, you've approved 2 previous 7460s, and you've approved our SRE building, which is about at the same height. And if it's a height issue, our roof line is not a whole lot shorter than where that hangar will be, because ours is way up on the hill. I think we're all a little surprised that it's been flagged at this stage.
I think you're just a little more risk adverse.
We did get it. I mean, that was one of the first meetings, Laura, you'll remember this, one of the first meetings we had with this developer. We said, we need to get information to the FAA, the first 7460 to check reflectivity. And that was one of the first things we did, was get a 7460 out. It was approved. And then we had better information on the location, so that was sent and it was approved. And now we have the actual staked corners, and at this time there's been a comment. But I don't think, like I said, in the end, I don't think the project will stop. I think, we'll be able to work this one through according to FAA. So.
Just seems like we're put a lot of infrastructure in, a lot of dollars have been spent, and there's still some bureaucrat that can say no.
Yep,
And that
yeah.
makes me uncomfortable.
Well, and I have to tell you, I was really impressed with Chuck last week, the manager of the Helena ADO, because he made that exact point without even being prompted. He said, you know, this is irritating to me that we've invested federal dollars down here to build taxi lanes, utilities and everything else, and now this is coming up. You know, I think the tech ops people would tell you it's natural over time to evolve your localizer as an airport becomes busier into a more advanced localizer. I mean, that's probably what you would hear from them is, well, it was time to upgrade your facilities. You know, and so, you know, like your wireless router at home, eventually it becomes obsolete and doesn't make that beep, beep noise anymore, and you have to get something new, right? I mean,
That's been quite some time.
I was gonna say, John, you might need a really new one.
you know, and so I think that's kind of, you know, what the FAA would say is, you know, this is it's time for you to upgrade because you're getting enough development down the flight line. Interestingly, though, we haven't had that much development down the flight line. So it's an odd comment to get.
So people off the airport, some north, they build barns, they have to get approval and all this, is
Yeah.
that what you're talking about?
Yeah, they have to file a 7460, and we wondered the same thing. Has there been enough development down the interstate that's causing some of this? Because as Vince says, that signal continues on for a long time, and you know, I guess it's probably not that because they're saying at the runway end the signal is not, it's already frayed. You know, but it makes you wonder if someone built a large building down there that wasn't necessarily a height issue, but caused reflectivity. I mean, what would that do to our signal?
What about the windmills?
Over here on the other side. No one's brought that up. Of course, those have been there now for 15 years or more.
Yeah, they were put in about the time the runway was.
Even
What is it? Is it 7 miles from an airport? You have to file 7460 for construction?
No, I think it's further than that. It
And
depends on the height.
Yeah, but any construction within 7 miles, I think. Does that sound right, Chris? Yeah. Yeah, and then anything taller than, I want to say it's, gosh, 150 feet, anything, no matter where it is, has to file. And then there's also what they call the TERP surfaces, which are graduated surfaces off the end of the runway that climb at different angles. And if a project could violate a TERP surface, you know, then it has to also have one. So yeah, they've kind of got 3 different ways. The worst part about that is the FAA has no enforcement tools. And so it's left to the airport to enforce those, and you end up in terrible situations. We almost had one a couple years ago with one of those radio towers where, you know, it potentially could have affected our minimums that was being proposed, and you know, we would have had to try to address that. And the FAA can come back to you and say, you have to protect the approach that is in your grant assurances, and you know, you have to buy the land or try to mitigate it or whatever you have to do to try and prevent that degradation of your airfield. That's all I have on the director's report.
Thanks, John.
Sure.
Get that Chicago flight at all around 24,
Yeah.
365 minutes.
Yeah, the one thing that is disappointing about that fare performance is they're saying probably next year we wouldn't see much increase in the amount of flying. But daily is still pretty good. We might be able to talk into a couple of weeks, at least get through Labor Day would be nice.
Yeah, that'd be way good.
Yeah.
John, was there any forward motion on the Loves issue, you think?
We have not heard. I contacted the developer, and there were several things they wanted to follow up on. And I did see they had some surveyors out there, was a week or two ago, to look at some of the comments maybe that MDOT had given them on the approaches into the area. But they seem like they're still committed to trying to figure it out. They haven't come back and given us any, you know, yes, no, it's the sign, we can't deal with that type of language. You know, if you read the weekly report, the issue that got them kind of agitated was they're limited to a 20-foot sign because of the city sign ordinance. And they, you know, I think this precise comment was, well, you just wasted an hour and a half of my time, the owner will never go for that. And so, you know, I think it is a serious concern. And so we tried to work around it a little bit by saying, what if we put it in the county parcels as opposed to the city parcels? The response to that was, you can't have the sign in one area and the development in another area. So that, that doesn't seem possible. The developer asked if there's an appeal process. There's not an appeal process. I pointed out that, well, there may not be an appeal process, but no one can prevent you from coming to talk to an elected body like the city council to present your case and see if they might make some accommodation. The response to that was the city council rarely overrules staff. So I think it is a serious concern, and that's $12 million in development sitting there that could come into the tax base, and so I'm not sure. I'm not sure where it'll go. I mean, I walked out of there thinking, wow, this is kind of a toss-up now. And in talking to Steve a week or two ago, he was following up on some other comments they had, planning to submit some new information and kind of see where things went from there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, director's reports, general business? First agenda item is the SRE budget increase.
Yes, so the SRE building, as we've gotten into acquiring the steel package, what we found is if we eliminate the fourth bay, there's not enough cross bracing in the end of the building to give it the structural integrity it needs. And so we have a couple of options. We can, number one, we could award the fourth bay. Number two, we can add a 10-foot bay to the end of the building to contain some cross bracing at an added cost of about $100,000. And so as we've looked through the possibilities there, it seems to us that there's better benefit in trying to build the fourth bay than to add a 10-foot bay at the end without any doors. And so as I mentioned several times in the last few weeks, I think even in the last director's report or the last meeting we talked about it, there is some end-of-year money this year from the FAA because of the reauthorization bill that went through. They got a little bump in discretionary money that's out there. So we've submitted that project for additional discretionary grants to see if the FAA would potentially fund the fourth bay for us. And so we have not heard on that, but we will hear in the next 3 weeks whether or not that would be considered. In addition, the FAA has agreed to allow us to use up to $350,000 of our passenger facility charge revenue in order to get that project done. Our match currently is about 188, and so we would use the 188 to match the federal grant. We can take that 188 all the way to 350 and use the 350 to pay for that fourth bay. And so what we're presenting here is two different potential options. At a minimum, we need to increase the lowest project budget up to the $2,018,139 in order to afford a buildable project, which would include that 10-foot bay. Alternatively, if the FAA tells us we have the additional funds, then what we would plan to do is build the maximum project at $2,318,446, get the fourth bay done, and potentially we'd even be able to alleviate the next year payback on our grants because the FAA might fund that piece now. And so we think there's a possibility we might receive quite a bit of discretionary money to help us get the project completed, about $300,000 of discretionary money. And so if that were the case, then we wouldn't be in the cash flow situation we've described before. Even if we use PFCs to pay for the fourth bay, that doesn't have the cash flow effect because the PFCs are in the account as they're collected from the passengers. So what you see here are two alternative budgets. We've got kind of a base build and a max build. That'll depend on how much funding is available here in the next 3 weeks, which one we would award. But at a minimum, we need to increase to get that 10-foot in. Probably the better course of action would be to get the entire fourth bay in at about double that cost, a little more than double that cost. But at least then we'd have a bay we can use with doors on it that we can pull equipment into. And so what we're asking the board for is permission to award either of those two schedules depending on funding. So increasing the budget to $2.32 million or to $2.018 million based on available funds.
So it's an increase of $100,000 or 300 or two. Sorry.
Yep, $100,000 or about 300. So
And we have the PFC funding available,
400.
correct?
Yeah, 400,000, you're right, 400, yeah, 100,000 or 300,000 more than that, 400,000.
Right.
Yes, we have the PFC capacity for the most part to do that. What we'd like to see is if the federal dollars are there, we definitely want to use those first.
Right.
Because they're discretionary monies, they're just additional funds. So we want to see that. If we can get the FAA to agree to allow us to amend that PFC application by the 15% administratively, we would have enough even with our PFC capacity to award the fourth bay. But we have to ask for that and get approved for that before we can afford the entire fourth bay even with PFCs.
And we don't have that PFC additional monies earmarked for anything else?
No, we don't. In fact, we would have to do a new application probably this year because we think it's likely we're going to get discretionary money for our snow blower, which was in the last PFC application to the tune of about $650,000. So we're going to have extra PFCs sitting there that we've got to go back and amend the application to use because we're collecting them already, but now we've found additional money that's going to be available. And so once we hear for sure that that snow blower is going to get discretionary funded next year, we've got to go back and amend the application anyway.
So we've talked about a number of meetings on reserve and where it's going to end up potentially. The first option of 100K does have to come from our reserves initially.
Yes, and that's on the last page of this memo.
Okay.
If you look, so we'll be drawn down in the first scenario, the base building estimate, we'd be drawn down to about $1.98 million, still well above where we've set our informal reserves, but it would be additional funds that we'd pull out and refund ourselves next year when we get our allocation of federal dollars.
And we're still planning on using $150,000 from billing either way?
Yes, that's already done. So either way, we'll use that 150 to help fund the part of the grants that we'll repay ourselves back from next year. Just a cash flow move, and they didn't move to 150, so we have that in hand. So if we receive maximum funding from the federal grant, on the second column over here, new grant estimated cost, it may be that our reserves are not impacted really at all. We wouldn't have to repay ourselves next year because we would get discretionary money this year that would absorb that grant capacity for next year, and we would have our full grant allocation next year. So that's the second scenario you see there. We wouldn't borrow $390,000 from ourselves. We would in fact pay that with grant money we received this year and have our full grant allocation next year. That's what we've asked the FAA for. We don't know for certain if that'll get awarded or not. It sort of works in our favor because we have this project ready to go and it's new work, so there is new economic impact. The FAA likes to see that. They hate to see a project that's already been done and trying to reimburse yourself for it because the economic impact has already been realized. So I think competitively, this project might actually sneak through there. They love to see that you have a project designed, on the books, ready to go, and they can allocate a new grant to it. Because then they call the senator and say, hey, look, you just got some new money in the region, it's going to have new jobs. You know, the press release sounds much nicer.
So when would you find out if you can use the additional PFC?
In the next, well, the PFCs we should find out relatively quickly. I think all we're going to have to do is notify the FAA that's what we want to do, and we should receive a positive response from that. I would say we can get that done in the next 3 weeks also. So one way or the other, I think we'll know everything we need to know in the next 3 weeks for the funding of either of these two options.
So within the next 3 weeks, you'd make a decision between one or two?
Yes, absolutely. We have to because they need to get the steel order.
It's a definite trigger, though. If you don't get the additional PFCs,
We're
you're
going to be short.
option.
Yeah, we're going to be short. So definitely.
Questions?
And in the long term, we really need that fourth bay versus just a 10-foot.
The 10-foot's not awful because we can store oils and things in there. It would be be kind of, if you think about it, there'd be kind of a plug in the middle of the building, where we could put tools and we could put, the oil and things. But, you'd have to operate that with a hand truck because there's no way to get in for deliveries. There's no door in it at all because the structure of the building can't absorb another hole there. But if we build the fourth bay, now you've got, a smaller bay in there where we can get smaller vehicles into, bring our oils in. We plan on a racking system in there so that oils could go up to the mezzanine. All of our brush fill, all the things that we have delivered could go up on that mezzanine. With the 10-foot bay, you would do the same thing. There's just no way to get it in there, so you have to pull a truck out, deliver everything into it, put the truck back in. It's just not as effective. And then there is a future expansion of this building, so this isn't the end of the building. There'll be more bays added in the future, so you'll have a kind of a gap in there with no door in the future if we do the 10-foot bay. Otherwise, you'll have a short bay. The other bay's only, what is it, 18 feet?
The existing bay or
No, the fourth bay is only
25?
25 feet. So it's a smaller bay than our big, large 30-footers that we're putting big equipment in. And most of that will be storage of smaller vehicles. Our 1 ton, for example, can fit under that rack. Some of our other equipment can fit under the rack, and then all the storage would be up on top of the rack.
How big is this building gonna get?
I think we're planning to add 4 more bays, after this, and that's in the distant future, as we need more equipment.
That's when we get to be the size of Denver.
We have 4 bays now, and we're adding, potentially 3 or 4 more, so we'll have 8 bays. But remember now that the tow behinds take up an entire, it's double loaded, it's 80 feet long. They take up the entire 80 foot because they have the tow behind room behind them. So that unit, each one of those units uses an entire bay by itself.
How many of those do you have?
Right now 3, and we'd like to buy a 4th.
If you keep it expand, is that gonna run into the north-south runway approach and stuff?
No, we have enough room to continue to extend that building out. It's in the master plan that way.
Just to back up, so we already approved 3 bays, right?
Yes.
Now they're coming back and saying 3 bays isn't possible without a 10-foot.
Right, the manufacturer of the building says you need more bracing, you're gonna have to add a 10-foot section in there to accommodate bracing.
Didn't they do the original design of the 3?
It was designed at 4, and then the 3 building cuts the 4th bay out, but what they're saying is there's not enough rigidity without that 4th bay, because that's where the bracing was gonna go, was in that 4th bay.
So we cut one of the bays out because of the additional cost?
Yes.
We just were over budget?
Right.
But we didn't go back to the building manufacturer and say, can you do this?
Yeah, I don't know, Chris, can you maybe enlighten us a little bit on that?
So we bid it with the 4th bay where the structural steel was in the 4th bay. And by removing that 4th bay, they are now saying it needs to be back into the 3rd bay. So we talked about, right now the airport needs 3 30-foot bays at a minimum to operate their facility. If we go to a 38 or 40-foot bay in order to accommodate that little bit, that requires, more steel and more bracing. So that's the whole reasoning for this 10-foot addition that we're putting in there.
Yeah, no, I get
The other
that.
option is-
I'm just a little bit confused
The
by,
3rd bay can't be 30 feet is the best way to describe it. So we designed 3 30-foot bays which accommodate our bigger rigs,
Yep.
and then a smaller 4th bay which had the steel in it.
sure.
And when we cut the 4th bay out, we can't cut the small bay, we have to cut one of the big bays. But the big bays are what we really need because
So-
our big rigs have 30-foot
We
bays.
take one of the 30-foot bays and it would go down to a 25 or something, so that way we would have the additional structural steel, but then the airport can't fit their large equipment that they're looking to store in there.
No, yeah, that part I get. I
Okay.
guess I'm just trying to make sure I understand how we got to where we are today. Because we all
Yeah.
decided we'll go from 4 to 3. There really wasn't any communication with the building manufacturer then that this couldn't be done?
No, because when it was bid, it has to be bid open and fair for all types of building manufacturers, not just this particular one that our contractor is going with,
Right.
because they were awarded the
They
project.
get to pick means and methods. So he bid, I can build this building with the 4th bay in it. We're not allowed to pick based on options.
Okay, I understand that part. Then we decided to go with 3 bays.
Right. We cut
And
it
how did we decide we could get to the right budget amount with 3 bays? Because again, I would have thought that would have been some communication back and forth with the contractor and the building manufacturer to say, we're going to cut it to 3 bays, what's your new price?
Yeah, we did, we had a way for them to bid the fourth bay. So we knew,
Separately?
yeah, the 4th bay was a separate bid item. The problem is we can't, in order to build the 3 bay building, the bay has to be smaller with this particular builder.
Just like we need a new building.
And we can throw out bids.
That's
I
it.
mean,
Then we
That's
go
the
through the whole
easy
bid
answer.
process and we lose our discretion.
We only got 1 bid though. I mean, that's one of the problems we have is we'd have to rebid the entire project at that point. And the FAA only allows us to pick based on 1 criteria. So we could have potentially said we're going to award based on the 3 bays, as low bidder or the 4 bays, right? I mean, we could have picked either one to say we're going to award this contract based on lowest bid on 3 bays or 4 bays because they're both federally eligible. In this case, we picked 4 bays because we really thought we had the budget for it, but in the end, we didn't have enough to get the 4th bay done.
But what, so the base bid was 4 bays,
Base bid was 3 bays.
Was it 3 bays? So we picked based on 3 bays, yeah.
and now they're saying they can't do the 3 bays for the same price? I'm just trying to understand on a contractual basis how they can say I can't do it.
They can do it, it'll just be a
They
smaller
can
bay.
do it, they just can't do what we want.
Yeah, they
They
can't
can't
build
give us
both.
the 3 big bays.
They can't do what they bid.
Right, well, I don't know,
I
Chris.
mean, in the bid, I would assume it's 3 30-foot bays, not 2 30s and a 25.
It is 3 30s, but it was based on the structural components being in the 4th bay. The 4th one, yeah.
So there's an asterisk at the bottom that says this 3 bay bid's only good if you build 4.
Or 3.5.
No, it's just wrong.
I mean, it's a serious question.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so, I mean,
I
certainly.
mean, when I misquote stuff, I eat it.
Yeah.
I eat a lot, because we make a lot of mistakes,
Still in business though.
but we still survive.
I am just trying to figure out how they can come back and say we can't build the 3 bays.
Right. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, it is a good question. I mean, you know, we've talked about that some and what
Are they
the
just simply asking because they're in a pinch?
I don't think they're in a pinch as much as they're just saying it's not possible to build, you know, what we have in the 3 bay drawings with this manufacturer, the way they did it.
I'd say their bid, it's not accurate then, right? We showed 3 bays.
We showed 3 bays. Well, yes.
3 bays at 30 feet,
When we bid it, we showed all 4 bays in the whole project, all 4.
but it was based on.
The
3
award
bid.
was based on 3 bays.
The 3 bay
The award was
bid,
based on
right?
3 bays.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why we aren't fighting back a little bit more diligently to say you have to do it.
I think they'll, I mean, we can do that. I think they'll submit a change order. I mean, they've already told us they've had 15% escalation on the base metal costs.
Is escalation in their contract?
No, but they're gonna eat that, and that's what they're saying. I think, you know,
That's the whole tariffs deal.
yeah,
So, I'm sorry?
because of the tariffs that have gone through since the bid process,
Sure.
they're saying they've had escalation. I mean, you know, I think, you know, we could certainly go back. I think, and I don't know, Chris, what your thoughts are. I think what they'll say is it's a change order and, you know, we're not gonna eat that cost and, you know, we're gonna be at loggerheads on, and probably, you know, just not do the project would be my guess. You know,
I've just never had that easy a time of walking away from a contract that I signed on a dotted line that said I could do.
well, I mean, I guess I'd
Are we
suggest.
doing this because we're trying to keep a relationship with a contractor?
No.
Are we contractually required to sign a change order for that, or did they bid 3 bays at 30 feet?
They bid 3 bays at 30 feet.
And we're not gonna require them to build 3 bays at 30 feet.
I think the preferred option right now is to build 4 bays.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, I guess what we could decide to do is not award 3 bays. You know, what we're saying right now is, you know, we would rather build the 4 bays anyhow.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, you know, that is one option we could, you know, do is just say, we're not gonna pay the extra for the 3 bays. You know, you've gotta figure out how to cross brace it.
So the 4th bay, is it based on the original bid? The
Yeah.
Additional amount?
Yeah.
So they're not coming back for 4 bays and asking for additional?
I don't believe so.
No, the 4 bay price is the same, and it's buildable because the 4th bay had the cross bracing, had room for cross bracing.
And the fourth bay is not 30 feet though.
No.
No, it
Small.
was never gonna be 30 feet.
So what it sounds like is they bid 4 bays accurately, and they bid 3 bays inaccurately, and they've decided to make it your problem, which then made it our problem.
It's hard not to see it that way.
Mhm.
I have clarity on my side.
Okay, so the decision is, do we go ahead with the option of providing
So the base,
The
the question
discretion of
is
one and four.
is it in the best interest of the airport to have that fourth bay?
Well,
Do we want
I think
that
the broader
space?
question is what kind of pricing do we get if we redid this again?
Well, I think
We had one bidder this year.
Yeah, it could be a lot more expensive.
It's-
But I mean, I guess in my world is if you only get one bidder, right?
Yeah.
It's time not to put the project on hold and wait a year or two until you get some competition in the market.
Right.
Because it's, when you got one bidder, you pay through the nose and stuff like this comes up.
I'm not sure metal pricing will come down, especially if we end up in a tariff environment.
Oh, it'll come down within the next decade.
Yeah.
The next recession is going to be nice.
I mean, it's gonna, it all does this, folks. It's gonna crash at some point.
further discussion? None? Is there a motion to accept the staff recommendation to allow them the discretion of either option?
I think it's in the best interest, and I think we got everything in place now to get the opportunity to get the discretionary money. And like John said, we're there, we're psyched up, all we gotta do is hit that go button, we'll probably get it, most likely, to be ready for it. So I would move that we accept this escalation as you described it.
Well, and like I said, the fourth bay, the pricing is held. I mean, it's, there's nothing different about the fourth bay bid from where we were. It's the three bay bid that's the problem because of that cross bracing. And so, I mean, certainly we could decide if we have enough funding to award the fourth bay, but not the three bay option, not the escalation. I mean, that's one possibility.
I'll second the motion.
So the item has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion before we take a vote? Any questions, comments? Sean?
Just doesn't feel right.
What's the likelihood of getting the PFC? Do you feel it's high, John?
Yeah, I think the FAA will, administratively, I think it'll be very easy to get that approved. Now, the discretionary money, that's a toss-up, I don't know. And certainly we would take that option first because that's newfound money. PFCs, we could reallocate those in another application down the road and use them for something different.
My own personal belief is that if we're going to put on the fourth bay, and that's really what we wanted to do initially, we came in over budget, putting on a fourth bay is a good idea for future development. Coming in and getting the third bay for an additional 100,000 where it's not as usable, and I disagree that contractually we should have to do it, I think is a poor idea, but I'm not sure that you're allowing us in this agenda item the opportunity to say yes to a four bay and just no to the third bay.
You could certainly make that motion. You could amend the recommendation for sure.
Then we're left with what? We either
You
get
could,
fourth
you
bay
could say
or nothing.
Right, fourth bay or nothing would be kind of the way I would structure it. Or, well, I mean, potentially we go back to the contractor and say, they are adding space to that third bay, but, we could go back and say, we don't have budget for it, so, you either do it for the original price
They're
or
not
not.
adding space, they're adding three
Adding
bays at
10
30
foot.
feet that they agreed to do.
3 bays at the 30
No, but
feet
then
plus
they put it
10
in.
more feet.
Plus, there's more
But that's-
steel.
That's
And
That's
there's-
not per the design. They bid
That just doesn't
90 feet, right?
make any sense to
They
me.
bid 90 feet. If they had to add 10 feet for their own design requirements, that's the contractor's decision to use that building manufacturer.
I see the point you're making.
Is it not a point that needs to be made to the
Yeah,
contractor?
no, I think, certainly that's a reasonable approach. Yeah.
I'm just trying to determine why there's hesitation from both of you, it appears to me, to ask the contractor to live up to their contractual agreement.
Yeah, I think,
What are we missing? I mean, there's gotta be something we're missing.
I think probably, if I were to do it over again, what I would show is I would show what they're proposing is, a shorter bay with the structural stuff in it. We would just simply get rid of one of the 30-foot bays and instead slide the fourth bay over as the third bay. Does that make sense?
That all I appreciate, hindsight's 20/20.
Right.
I guess my question still stands, why is there a hesitation to go back? And if it becomes a third bay, say you need to build what's shown on the design document.
Because I mean, that's what I'm saying. What's shown in the design documents, based on our discussion now, may not be buildable. And I'm not sure it's buildable with any manufacturer, because a 30-foot bay with no additional space for bracing may not have the structural rigidity it needs to meet the engineering requirements. You see what I'm saying? I mean, you know, in light of what we had now, what the design probably should have been was, if we're eliminating a bay, we eliminate a 30-foot bay in order to have the structural component in the outer bay, which would have been the smaller bay, which is now our fourth bay. Probably need the drawing to understand.
No, I think I understand.
Yeah, I'm not sure the option of 3 30-foot bays is buildable.
Obviously not, they don't want to build it, obviously, so.
And who knows, I mean, if we shopped a couple more manufacturers, I mean, is this a Butler building? You know, who are they using?
Our original line's in metallic, and I don't know if
That's the same.
Same
filter.
manufacturer.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe if we went to Butler, maybe they could figure out a way of doing it. I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's buildable the way we have it in the plan set as a third bay.
Dwight,
I'm
is
trying
that a
not
comment?
to inject my opinion, but just listening to the conversation, the original was 4 bays, 3 30-footers, and a smaller one.
Right,
Then you said we don't have enough money, and so you're cutting off the smaller one.
Right.
When maybe the contractor's intention was to eliminate one of the larger ones.
well, it's clear in the plan
Is
set
that the
that's not an option.
miscommunication?
No,
Yeah.
in the plan set it's clear that's not an option. We were eliminating the outer bay, which was the smaller bay. But, you know, I think the problem is there's not enough space in there to do the bracing that, you know, that needs to be done on the outer wall. Is our outer wall now, Chris, how big is that bay?
It's a 30-foot bay.
The last one's a 30-foot bay? Yeah, so with the smaller building, we can get, you know, there is cross bracing on the outer wall, and we're still able to get the 30-foot bay, but, you know, with the larger
on our
building.
existing building, it's 25.
Yeah, it's 25 in the outer, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
The existing fourth bay is 25.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, even that one has a
And
small
then they
bay.
have what they call the portal frame in there, right? Which is given it the bracing.
But that one was also designed to take the wall off too, and I don't know what the effect of that is.
Why isn't it, this is a newbie question, why, it seems like the normal process of things, this would require a change order, in my experience, whenever you
It will.
change the design.
Yeah, we'll have to have a change order to document what we're doing. Yeah, so there'll be a change order either way, but I mean, what I'm saying is that it doesn't mean we'll agree on the change order. They could submit something and say, we need this, and, you know, if we don't have the budget for it, we'll just say, you know, we're not going to award that change order, and then we end up with, you know.
The difference that I see between what you're asking is, we set out a set of plans that showed 3 bays at 30 feet. And they bid 3 bays at 30 feet. They're now coming back and saying, we can't build 3 bays at 30 feet.
But is the
That
original
is
bid,
not-
is the original bid 3 bays? I thought the original bid was 4.
It's both.
And we cut it off to 3.
It's both. We have, the original facility shows 4 bays, and we have pricing for 3 bays at 30 feet.
So the airport is not asking for more space, they're asking for what was in the original bid documents.
All right.
I don't see how that's a change order.
I don't know, they're changing, they're asking us to cover a mistake that they made in their 3-bay proposal. I'd say.
Yes, that's not actually a change
That's,
order.
that's how I see it, right?
Well, that's what it is, but whenever you change the scope of work,
Yeah, it'll-
it has to be documented.
It'll be
somehow.
changed, there'll be a change order generated if we do the 3-bay option. If
But
we
it
do the
should be a
4-bay
change order at
option,
their cost, not at our cost.
Sure.
exactly.
But they're probably saying, they don't have the money to do it at that cost, so. I mean, that's what they're.
Well, I think it all gets back to, do we want, it's either for or honor your bid is how I'm looking at it. But that's not what we have in the second motion. That's not the motion of the table.
Right.
How can we change the motion?
Well, I mean, you can vote it down, or you can't just offer an alternative
Yes.
motion?
So Vince.
Prior to the vote or after the vote?
You can do it prior to the vote if Vince wants to
Rescind it.
make a change to his.
Because he
But if he wants to let it ride the way it is, then we need to vote on it.
Why, Vince? Because you
I
made
made
the
the
motion.
motion.
You made the motion.
She
Thanks.
seconded. So how do we want to, or do we want to modify the motion?
All I can tell you is I disagree that we should be paying additional money for a design that they bid off of construction documents. So I would,
If we change the motion, and I don't have a problem changing it. If we change the motion to as desired on the 4-bay or the 3-bay as
At the original
previously contracted, and they come back and say, we can't do that,
Yeah, we would rebid it next year.
you could end up with nothing.
Yeah,
Right, that's
that's
what.
true.
So that's my point, is do you want the option to end up
Well,
with nothing?
what about contractual obligation?
Well,
They
They
can't-
bid it
Then you're
and
talking about
signed the
lawsuit.
document. Well, certainly.
No, but I
That's
mean,
why we have
We're gonna
lawyers.
waste more than $100,000 doing that.
Yeah.
And not likely win that. They're gonna probably say it's Arizona.
They're gonna walk away from it and go, we're gonna lose our ass, we're not, go
That's
ahead
why
and
they,
sue us.
that's
And
why they
and
have
they probably
insurance.
countersue for what they didn't get, work they didn't get.
But what's the opportunity cost of not doing the 3-bay option? I mean, we lose money that wouldn't be available in the future.
No, our entitlement grants stay in place. I think what you end up with is an escalated project cost when we decide to do it. You might guess, I mean.
25% more.
We made the assumption that it might be more than 100,000
Yeah.
another year.
Or the economy could crash because of the trade war and tariffs, and it could be 30% cheaper.
Everybody's predicting a recession in 12 to 24 months. from what
I mean, it could go either way. Can't be.
That's a true statement.
I mean, I think it would be short-sighted not to award the 4 bays because if we get the discretionary money, that's an added
I think everybody's.
$300,000 that we wouldn't normally have for the project. Because it's a very low-ranking project in the FAA lexicon of projects.
I'm in favor of the 4th bay.
Yeah, I think everybody.
Who is the contractor?
Detailed
Detail.
construction.
I think, is that the Stockett? No, that's.
They're out of stock yet.
Yeah.
So it's bid.
So if we don't change the motion, do you have the discretion if we don't get awarded the money we need to do the total 4-bay, of either having them meet the contract criteria or not allowing the 3-bay to be put forward?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to award the 3 bays, and we could always, just tell them, it's at the original cost, or we're not gonna do the project.
So has the 3 bays not been awarded?
It's been awarded.
We had a
it's not
signed
been-
contract.
Say again?
But
We have a
we're
signed
asking for,
contract.
but we're
We don't have
asking
to
for
award the change
100,000
order.
more to
No.
award the 3-bay.
Well, we are not.
Well, they are,
They are.
they're asking us for another 100 grand.
But we don't have to approve the change order.
So
And there
that's-
is,
that's
aside
the
from
point.
the.
We've got the capability without changing the motion of not accepting the additional change order, right?
Yeah, we don't have money for it. So, I mean, if you just, but if you make the motion and approve the money we've asked for, then we would have the money for it. Doesn't mean we have to approve it. But there's, in addition to the additional steel costs, isn't there a city change in there, Chris? I thought the city wanted something else done.
The city has asked for water lines, but we've talked about water line valves and things like that, but we've talked about that at previous
We
meetings.
can award that in the current budget.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's a few other minor changes in there, aside from just the additional 10 feet that, but they're minuscule. Most of the cost is the 10 feet.
Do you guys, so I guess the question is, do you want to vote on the motion as is? And if it's not approved, then we can do an amended motion.
Well, I think that's your call because you.
Well, no.
You made
Our
the
call.
motion.
Well, I did, you seconded it. So-
Yeah, so
Would you like to vote on it?
Would we like to vote on it? Let's vote on it. Let's vote on it as is.
Okay, the motion, as recommended by staff, for 2 options, has been moved and seconded. Is there any final discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion as listed by the staff, please by signifying by saying aye.
Aye.
Sorry, so can I just make sure, was that 3? All those opposed? opposed to the motion as listed, please signify by saying nay.
I'd like to be.
Nay.
I'm in the ayes, I just was gonna say.
Okay. I'm just not sure, did we have a vote? Aye. Aye. So it passed 4-3.
You're an I too?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. The motion's passed 4-3.
So the ball's in his court.
Yeah.
Actually, that's
If
5-2.
5-2.
Five to
Sorry,
two.
my fault.
Yeah.
5-2.
5-2. Okay.
That's good.
And our hope is we'll get the fourth day, and so we all win, but.
I think we'd all be happy, we'd all be happy with that.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Be a good
Yeah.
steward.
How the.
No, definitely, we'll keep you informed on that.
That's the last and only agenda item on the board meeting. Are there any airport authority board comments? Commissioner Kimball, Commissioner Harms, Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Baki, Commissioner Evans, Commissioner Holden.
As you all know, my father's in politics. And so he and I were talking about the Loves. And his network has a different opinion. In regard to, they believe that it would be crazy to let this get away and that the city is working hard to make it happen. For what it's worth. That's what's going around the Republican
Circuit.
gossip.
Columns that the city is,
In active communications with the developers and see no reason why it's not moving forward.
What?
Oh, the development.
I'd say
The
aside from the
loves.
20-foot sign, that's true, but I mean, I was at the meeting, so.
Well, I'm just telling you that I had that conversation.
I mean, they did have a planning meeting with them, which was good.
okay?
They also believe that there is a variance or an appeals process, which
Wow, we should get the meeting minutes then. 'Cause I was-
I would love to see the meeting minutes if we
Yeah.
could. 'cause
Are there
they-
meeting minutes published for those?
I doubt it.
I don't know. It's a
No.
public meeting, should we?
Okay.
But this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm trying
For
to
variance.
leverage
Yeah,
my
it's just crazy.
women's
The issue
familiarity.
Yeah, the biggest issue seems to be the sign. Yeah, 20 foot versus, Loves with like 60 feet. I mean, if you look across the interstate, those signs are 40, 60 feet. And one of them's in the city, one of them is not.
Can't believe the city would even not have a process to bring in that much revenue.
Well, I guess I'd say this, I mean, the specific things said by the developer, I mean, this will maybe shade some of your opinion on it. The developer said specifically, most cities have a overlay ordinance down their interstate to void out any signage requirements because it's recognized that the interstate signage is different than city signage. The city said they do not have that. So, I mean, I'm not sure why we wasted all that time talking if that's, where the city was on this conversation. It seems like that meeting would have been shorter.
How high does a new water tank go?
160 feet, is that right?
140. That's higher than the sign.
Yeah,
Well, funny day, had a big long sign.
that's in the county though,
It's across the road.
Yep. Yeah, the county is right there, so the one on the water tank side is in the city, and it does have taller signage. And of course, the developer pointed out, I mean, a 20-foot sign on that hill coming up or going down, no one will see that, it'd be impossible to see it. And so the developer asked, where's the 20-foot counted from? Can we mound up a bunch of dirt, put the sign on top of that? Can I put the sign on top of the building? Can I put the, there was a lot of discussion about that, so.
But it can't be where the sign's in the county, in the building signs. That's a law, or that's a rule, or that's.
I mean, the county planner was there, and the city planner said, I don't think the county would allow a sign in the county for a development that's in the city. And this development actually spans both the city and the county. So that was my question is, do we have to annex the county piece in? Can we just leave a piece there with the sign on it? So we don't violate the code, but apparently that's not acceptable either, so.
Some of these questions I would think would be the responsibility of the developer.
Sure
to
they are.
really follow up on.
Yeah.
At the meeting, what you told me, please show me the requirement.
Yeah. And they did give them the code while we were there, so, they did give them the signage code, so.
I do think it's in our best interest to try and help the process.
Yep.
I don't have any further comments. No further, sorry, are there any additional public comments? With no further business to come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. If we could take 5 minutes, and then we'll come back for the work session.
Proceeds to next one.
Yes.